Alright, so this is a bit of a different type of video to the last few that I've posted on here, but some of you may know that I'm really into street photography and I post a lot of my Brighton street photography shots over on my Instagram page, which is Made in Brighton, so go and check that out and drop me a follow over there, it'd be much appreciated. But today I thought I'd try something new. I thought I'd take you guys along with me for a behind the scenes look of how I shoot my shots around Brighton. And today I'm shooting on the Lumix S9 with the 50mm 1.8 prime, and we're gonna go and wander around Brighton for a few hours and I'll take you for a bit of a POV look in terms of how I spot my shots, how I think about framing and composition and lighting. And then we'll head back here afterwards and I'll show you my workflow and we'll do some quick edits in Lightroom before we post the photos to Instagram. And this is the first time I've done one of these POV type videos, so a lot of this is just me figuring this out as I go. Please let me know if you like these videos and I'll do more of them in the future. Again, any tips or tricks on that, welcome. Okay, let's go shoot.
I walked along to these kind of huts on the seafront, which if you're from Brighton, you'll be very familiar with. But this is the smokehouse. I've got so many shots in front of this. It's kind of a good spot to just sit and wait for someone to walk past, as they did right here. And I got a kind of, starter shot for the day with a bit of motion blur as this guy was running through the frame. And then just a few meters away, you've got this old fishing museum sign against this little hut. Again, it's another kind of classic Brighton shot. These are all like warm-up shots, I feel, just to kind of get the muscle memory going. And it's the first time I've been out with a camera in a while, so yeah, just getting back into it. And again, waiting for something interesting to happen, and this lady walked past holding a bag. And then here, I think I must have been starting to get a bit bored or struggling to find anything interesting going on. So I thought I might experiment a bit with some sort of motion blur here, try and get a bit of artiness going on. So I stood here for a while, shaking the camera around. People probably thought I was crazy, but I ended up with this kind of abstract shot of the Brighton shoreline with a few of the lights in it, and I quite like this. I'm kind of into this sort of mood at the moment. Yeah, I'm quite enjoying this. And then on the same theme of motion blur, with the rides going around and some of the lights, I thought this might be a good op to kind of get some of this movement captured, which I did here, which reminds me of an album cover of a record my dad used to have, and I can't remember what the record was, but if he sees this, he'll probably know what I'm talking about. But yeah, this is probably my favorite shot of the day. And then here, I was walking back actually, I was about to leave, and then if you've ever shot on Brighton Pier, you'll know you've got all these windows all along that make like perfect frames. And if you look at my Instagram page, you'll see a few photos I've taken like that. And then I saw this guy, this old guy walking along who was on the phone, he was wearing a flat cap, and I thought, oh, that looks quite interesting. So I think I missed the first shot as I was sort of behind him. So I kind of walked a bit quicker here to try and get in position for when he hit the next kind of clear frame. So you'll see me do that here. I get ready, and then he walks in and bang, I've got that picture. And then I thought, I'll have another attempt at this. So I moved forward again, waited for him to come in, and I got him again just as he was walking past. And then walking back to the car, through the lanes here, I thought this window was quite cool. It's this frosted window outside Donatello's, which is a Italian restaurant. So I paused here for a sec. I was actually just trying to get a picture of the window. I didn't know, whether I might see a chef or something moving inside, and thought that might be quite cool. But then just as I was framing up, a couple of guys walked past. I quickly managed to frame it up in time and snap them just as I was walking past. Quite like this, the contrast against the frosted window. So that's it. Now let's take a look at some of the editing in Lightroom.
Okay, we're back from our walk around Brighton, and I've now loaded a few shots into Lightroom, and let's edit them now. Some of these I'll do a kind of full breakdown edit as we go. Others I'll apply a preset to and show you kind of how I use that approach to speed up my workflow as well. I'm not going to do a full tutorial in terms of what every one of these settings does. There are plenty of YouTube videos around that, but if there are any specific questions, let me know, and maybe I will do a more detailed look at these Lightroom settings in general. The intention of this video is kind of a quick walkthrough in terms of how I go from shooting the shots, getting them in Lightroom, and then exporting them and getting them ready for Instagram. By the way, I should point out, it's quite rare that I edit a photo going through every single setting these days. I've got a selection of presets, which I'll talk about in a second. I use them as my starting point, so it's very rare I kind of go in and tweak the colors specifically every single time, but I'm just going to showing you here how I would do it from scratch if I wasn't using a preset. So this was probably one of my favorite photos of the day. So I'd usually start by just lining it up properly, making sure we've got the kind of framing right here and that it's straight. Wouldn't worry too much, but that looks pretty good. I'm trying to basically center this in the middle here, which that's pretty much on, I think. Cool. And then we kind of start by some basic adjustments. Like, again, I kind of like the dark moodiness of this, so I'm probably not going to mess too much with the exposure, but I probably want to drop the highlights slightly, just maybe lift the shadows a little bit here, a bit more detail down in the bottom. And then whites, I tend to like whites and blacks, tend to kind of go to the extreme and find a place that I like here. So I'm going to lift the whites a little bit to about 25, and then with blacks again similar. I kind of like the kind of moodiness here. You're still getting a bit of the detail in the shadows, but you still get the kind of moodiness of the blacks. And then in a tone curve, I'm going to do a very subtle S curve. I'm going to drop the white at the top, lift the black slightly, just so you get a bit of a kind of faded look on it. Temperature wise, this is obviously where you're going to have a major impact on your image. So again, kind of get it to where you want to be. I'd say this actually probably feels a bit too warm based on the actual shooting conditions of the day. So I'm going to drop this down around 5500, which as you can see brings a lot more of that blue back into the sky rather than it being kind of purpley, almost grey in some ways. For the tint, that's fine, leave it at +12. Vibrance, so obviously this is quite a vibrant image anyway with all these colours in, but I'm going to lift this up slightly, +10, that looks pretty good to me. And then saturation, maybe you want to desaturate this slightly to give it a bit more of a vintage kind of filmy kind of feel. And that, as a kind of starting point, is alright. I think where we start to get a bit more exciting is with some of the colors here. On the reds here, I think let's leave the hue where it is. I quite like the reds. Yeah, I think +20 looks pretty good here. Orange, let's lift the oranges, bring that up a bit. Saturation again, let's lift that up, I reckon, quite a lot. Yellows, they're fine. Greens, we've got some greens in these lights here. Moving on to some of the kind of more effects down here. I'll come back to the actual color grading in a second, but on the effects side of things, texture, I'm going to leave as it is. Clarity, I tend to drop. You'll probably see in most of my images that I drop clarity quite a lot. I think it gives quite a nice effect. If you go too far, it's too much, although in this occasion it doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to kind of bring it down to around 20, 25 here, because I just think it gives a bit of a kind of softness to the image, which is cool. Dehaze, yeah, no, I'm going to leave that as it is. There is an image in a second which I will probably introduce some dehaze to. On the grain side, I really like to add a bit of grain, give it more of a kind of vintage effect. So again, be careful with the amounts that you're introducing here because it can get out of hand quite quickly, but I'm going to go with around 25 grain. If you zoom in, you can kind of see the effects of that starting to come in. That's it's clean. And then,
Yeah, about 25. You can affect the size of the grain as well, so how big the grain looks, and then the roughness of the grain as well. I'm going to leave at 50, which is standard, but and then on the sharpening side of things as well, you know, less is more here. I'm going to leave the default, but what I will often do, yeah, looking at the masking, is kind of seeing which parts of the image the sharpening is affecting, and you don't want it in the whole image as it is here. I'm going to kind of scale this back. So you're just kind of getting the edges of the detail in the image. I think, yeah, maybe just around these lights actually looks pretty good. So maybe around there, 73. That looks quite cool. And then the kind of finishing touches tends to be on the color grading side of things. So here I might just kind of introduce a little bit of green potentially here to the shadows. And again, it's a kind of case of playing around with it. And then for the highlights here, yeah, I like bringing some more of that orange in from the lights here. So, and then midtones, I generally leave alone, and that I'm quite happy with. So that's our before, that's after, and I think it's quite a cool little effect, before, after. I'm quite happy with that, but there's an image and I feel like it's, you know, pretty much good to go. The only thing I would say is, of course, what's worked for me here might not work for you. You know, this is all about trial and error, working out what works for the image, what works for your style. Please keep that in mind. You will build up your own style and your own kind of tools over time that you go to. I mean, that is the thing with all of these edits, right? Please don't take this as gospel. What looks good for this image is not going to look good for your image or the next image that I edit. So I would generally have a kind of starting point in mind and then tweak from there. And on that note, with a starting point in mind, I mean, here's another shot I took. Nice little seagull in front of Brighton Pier. Now, just to kind of show you what's maybe a more accurate view of how I actually edit, I've got some presets here that I have built over time, and I'm actually selling these presets now over on my new website, which is madeinpresets.com. So go and check that out if you're looking for a kind of solid starting point for your images and your edits, and you don't want to have to go through kind of every single setting in Lightroom, then check them out. I've really kind of built these over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, using them in my own workflow, and I think they could be quite helpful for you. So if you're looking for that kind of great starting point for quite a cinematic, colorful, but also moody look, I've got a selection here based on my like Brighton shooting experience, but they are kind of, they work obviously for any environment. Cool, so I would usually kind of hover over some of these presets to kind of gauge a good starting point. I want something quite colorful here, I think, just to get those lights in the background. Oh, that's quite nice, this East Street one. Something I'm quite happy. I quite like this East Street preset I've got here. And so what I generally do is then kind of go through. I mean, overall, I quite like the exposure of this image, so I'm probably not going to change a huge amount here. But what I will do, yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with this. But what I will do is, I don't think the seagull here is kind of standing out against the background as best as it could. So I would usually apply a mask. There we go, Lightroom's done a great job. I selected the subject mask and it's selected the seagull in the foreground here. And I'm just going to kind of bump the exposure of this up a little bit. There you go, it kind of really kind of pops on that background now. And then maybe the highlights up a tad, and then the shadows, yeah. And there you go. I mean, already that was like 3 clicks, and you know, we applied the preset, we added a mask, and we've adjusted that mask slightly just to make the seagull kind of pop out. So yeah, moving on to the next one. I like this. This kind of had this, like, I don't know, New York-y kind of vibe. This is on Brighton Pier of this girl in the donut shop. And I think this one could look good with a kind of black and white type of effect on this. So again, I'm going to go to my Made in Brighton preset pack, and I'm going to select one of my black and white presets I've got here. I've got 3 black and white presets. One is Pier Mono, Pier Grain, and Pier Classic. I really like the kind of grainy effect on this. It looks very retro. And again, like that in one click, you know, we've gone from this to this in one click, and I think that looks pretty good. So, see, one thing I would also adjust here, looking at the sharpening, you know, looking at how much of the image is actually being sharpened here. And there's this mask tool, if you're not aware, when you go to slide this mask tool, it will show you which parts of the image that you're actually sharpening. When you're on a Mac, you press the Option key as you're sliding it, it will kind of show you here, which is what's happening.
And I really kind of want the main, standout edges, if you like, of the image to stand out here. We don't want to sharpen absolutely everything as it will look overkill, but I'll use the option key to slide until I kind of just get the edges of the objects and the people, but I don't want it to be, sharpening absolutely everything in the image. So let's pull that back a bit to about kind of there. That looks pretty good to me. And again, boom, in one click, I'm really happy with the kind of way that that's turned out. Look, that grain is looking really nice on this image. I'm going to skip to this one here. Now, this actually wasn't shot in Brighton. And the reason I'm including this one is this was an iPhone shot. This is in Dishoom, the Indian restaurant in London. And I just kind of got this shot as I was walking out. So again, I've got on my preset pack 2 variations. I've got the camera one, which are kind of from your camera raw files. And I've got an iPhone Pro Raw version of the same presets. They've been slightly tweaked. They make sure that they use the right Apple Pro Raw color profile, so they kind of work on iPhone better. And again, let's kind of have a look through here, through some of these presets. Oh, that one looks quite nice. Oh, that one also looks quite nice. I think I like this one. On these Brunswick portrait ones I've done, they're kind of designed more for a portrait to get the skin tones more spot on, but in this case, I quite like what it's doing here. Yeah, I'm going to go for my Brunswick portrait one. And let's make some kind of basic adjustments here. Let's bring the highlights down just to give it a bit of a flatter look. Shadows, again, I'm quite happy with how this has come out just in one click. What I might do though, to add a bit of pop to this image, is let's add a few of these masks here. So I'm not one of these photographers that masks every single image that they work on, but this one I think could suit itself quite nicely. So I'm going to add from the bottom left here, a linear gradient, and I am just going to drop the exposure quite a lot just to get some moodiness to this image. Let's just move this around a little bit. And I kind of want the corner of this image to almost disappear into, yeah, there we go, like this. I think that looks quite cool. And then to counter that, in this corner here, we've got this window with some light coming in. So I'm going to add another mask. Maybe we'll do a radial gradient. Now, I want this to almost like recreate the light that's already coming into the room. So let's do this. I'm going to take it off to the side. And I'm going to just bump the exposure slightly here, just to kind of give that. And then I'll also use, often in this situation, the dehaze tool. So the dehaze tool, usually, as the name suggests, is to kind of clear any haze that you have in your image. But if you use it the other way around and kind of reduce the amount of dehaze, then it adds a bit of haze and mistiness into your image as a kind of bit of an effect. And you can see that's happening up here. So I'll just turn that off again, that's 0. And then bringing a bit of haze back in just to that mask. I think that looks pretty cool. Maybe draw it back a little bit, a bit more subtle. Boom. I mean, that's crazy. I did an iPhone photo and now I've edited it in Lightroom and I'm quite happy with the way that's come out. Pretty nice colors, and I think that's kind of ready to go to Instagram. So there you go. That's a kind of very express look at how I bring my images into Lightroom, do some kind of quick edits using either the kind of full workflow, going to setting by setting, and then another look at how I would use presets to kind of speed that process up. If that works for you, then check out my presets, which are madeinpresets.com. All right, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed walking around Brighton with me. I got a few shots I was happy with. I hope you found it interesting to see how I approach my edit process in Lightroom. If you did, please drop me a like or a comment down below. I check the YouTube Studio app about 500 times a day at the moment, so I get quite excited when you guys interact, so please do. And if you're into street photography or geeking out over camera gear, then consider subscribing for more of these videos in the future. And if you want to see the photos we looked at today over on my Instagram page, then go and check them out, Made in Brighton, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.